Hello, and welcome to this episode of Such a Nightmare Conversations about Horror. I am Katherine Troyer, and I'm so excited that I get to discuss this film with Toni Tresca.
Hey there.
This is a podcast where the horrifically nerdy meets the terrifyingly academic, as we explore that fine line between the horrific and the horrible. Each episode looks at a specific horror text that is for better or worse giving us nightmares.
And this week, we are so excited that you're joining us for our conversation about 1993's Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday.
So I think we both decided that we were going to be brave and acknowledge a truth, which is that both of us were watching this late at night and both of us were struggling mightily to stay awake. Now, I think I only fell asleep for about 2 seconds because I just kind of, but I don't actually think I missed anything because I think even if I'd been watching it, it still would have been confusing. But there was I was struggling to stay awake.
Yeah, this is the first time it has happened to me, I'll admit, while doing anything for the podcast, film, book, whatever. I did nod off, it was around the time that the police officer first showed up. I kind of was starting to fall asleep because I really had realized that this movie was not going to deliver on its central promise by then, and had
Yes.
I had kind of started to check out. But I quickly kind of woke up, so I only missed a couple minute or so, and I rewound it.
Which
I rewound it, but then I didn't
anything.
I realized, and then I felt stupid for rewinding it because I was like, I just wasted 2 minutes of my time. It's just 2 minutes, but it was 2 minutes I'm never gonna get back from this film.
But I want to say, with that in mind, I actually liked this film better than some of the other Friday the 13th.
Yeah, and you may not have been able to tell that this was a Friday the 13th film from the title, because like every one of the Friday the 13th films, this is plagued with drama. We'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, I honestly probably couldn't tell from our setup. But yeah, there were a lot better moments in here than some of the previous ones we've been discussing. Although the middle really drags in this one.
Yes.
We can, I guess, get into that.
Yeah. So let's begin with the acknowledgement that both of us thought we were going to hell and we didn't.
No.
So what then, Toni, is this film about?
So the film begins with this really kind of trip down memory lane almost, where we watch this woman kind of going into a cabin, and she proceeds to kind of act in a very, already in 1993 become very stereotypical at this point. And then it looks like she's about to get murdered by Jason, but then bum bum bum, plot twist. It's actually, she's an FBI officer. This is a raid, and then they all just kill.
Yes.
They kill Jason, and so the film begins with him dying, and being taken to a hospital. But quickly, we learn the central conceit of this movie is that although he's dead, his soul can still live. And we'll get into the exact specifics of the canonical reasons and crossovers of exactly how his soul is able to come back. But he does, and he's able to kind of possess people. But in order to resurrect himself, he must find and possess a member of his bloodline. But dun 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 dun, he can also be killed by his surviving relatives using and I feel silly saying this, but it is what it is. It's a magic dagger. If you find the magic dagger, you can kill Jason, and you can then send him to hell, which the movie does briefly for 5 seconds. I'll just tell you that now. So if that's why you want to watch this movie, just look up the clip. It's a cool shot. There's some cool effects, but it is not what the movie is about.
Unsurprisingly, there is very little scholarship on Jason Goes to Hell, in part because, as we've talked about previous films, there's just less scholarship on the Friday the 13th franchise, because I don't think it's ever been a critical darling, even if it's been a sort of fan darling. But the book we have been referencing all along, because it's literally the only book on Friday the 13th, is Wickham Clayton's See, Hear, Cut, Kill, experiencing Friday the 13th. And if you look in the index, this film only has probably the equivalent of 2 total pages if you pulled every line, because some of it's just like, this film does it well, but Jason Goes to Hell does not, right? There's a lot of just like kind of throwaway moments. But there are a couple things he says that I think are important. And so he says, instead of relying on cameo appearances or 3D sequences, Jason Goes to Hell again announced the finality of the series through the title. The film also tried to explain the logical gaps in the overarching story. Jason Goes to Hell applies an explanation that Jason's essence is essentially a demonic worm that uses human bodies as hosts, and only a special dagger wielded by a relative can kill him, explaining why he keeps returning from the dead. This overtly supernatural development shares similarities with the Halloween sequels. And then he talks about the fact that 1993, which is the year that Jason Goes to Hell came out, this is a quote from him, proved a low point for slasher films, with the only significant addition being Leprechaun, a film in which a leprechaun kills people in order to defend and retrieve his gold. So when that's your, like, hit film of the 1993, and Leprechaun's a fun film, but, like, it's another one of those that has gained a cult following that I can't always understand.
For sure.
The other thing that Clayton talks about that I think is important, because it's a really insightful part of his book, is he spends a lot of time talking about the fact that Friday the 13th does intriguing things in terms of the perspective of the camera. A lot of times it really is showing us the perspective of the victim in a way that felt very intriguing. But he says, by the time we get to Jason Goes to Hell, the eye/camera use appears practically unwieldy. At different points, it inhabits most of the characters central to the narrative, as well as other minor characters without clear consistency. The eye camera works through people as they watch events from a distance, people who are the victims of violent action, and those who are the perpetrators of violent action. There is no clear standard for the use of the camera at this point. Slashers were desperate to regain a successful formula. And then I do like the sentence he says, I like to think of what ensues in Jason Goes to Hell as joyous chaos. And I feel like joyous chaos is perhaps the best word to describe Jason Goes to Hell, because you could tell that they just didn't have any more bothers to give. There are times that there's inconsistency in how much blood is in a various scene.
Mm-hmm.
There are moments that they're just like, oops-a-daisy, that probably doesn't make sense. Keep filming. And there's all of these, there's no cameos by people that were meant to be cameos, except for Kane Hodder gets a cameo outside of being Jason. But there are all of these cameos of other franchises, right?
Yes.
So we see the Necronomicon, Freddy,
the claw
fingers and sweater, mm-hmm.
as well as the dagger is also from the Evil Dead franchise as well.
Oh yeah, that's right. And there's even there's references to various names of people that, and there's a shot where we see something that says like from Antarctic trip, and then it says property of, and it's Julia Carpenter, right? But like we have a nice little the thing reference. So they managed to get in some cameos that way, but it really is joyous chaos at its finest and worst.
Yeah. And they did a lot of these things. So the Evil Dead nods were done without seeking any rights, but they did go to Sam Raimi during the filming of Army of the Dead to grab props. So
oh my gosh, that's so funny.
I guess they kind of got rights below the board for that. And that was kind of a cool nod. And it is fun to kind of reinterpret that as like Pamela Voorhees used the Book of the Dead to like keep her son alive and turn him into like this deadite figure. You know what? It's honestly the most compelling argument for Jason to this point. Like, whereas I feel like when we talked about, I thought it was an astute observation that the scholar highlighted about the comparisons to the Halloween franchise. Whereas with the Halloween franchise, I think we were very critical, or I'm kind of, as Michael Myers became more of a magic man, it kind of became sillier because his whole thing had been that was so grounded. In Jason, he had except aside from really maybe a little bit in the first one, he's always kind of been super over the top, and you're like, this doesn't make sense for like a regular man. So you know what? The fact that he's like a crazy deadite, it kind of makes sense in like a fun way.
It does. It makes as much sense as anything does, right?
Yeah. And there are so many like weird other like interesting constraints about this film in particular that I think it's interesting that it comes across so kind of like slapdash because it's really like previewed at the top. All the filmmakers took it so seriously and really
Which is, I
thought,
think, my favorite part
isn't
of
it?
all of these films.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to say like so. The film, directed by Adam Marcus, written by Jay Hughley and Dean Lorey, and produced by Sean S. Cunningham. And those are really the names to kind of remember. Those are some of our key players here. So originally, this was pitched by the producer to kind of be a horror action comedy where he's going to battle Freddy. Obviously, did not happen in this one, did happen later down the lines because, and the reason that this idea was on the table right here was because this was the first Friday the 13th film to be released by New Line Cinemas, which owned the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. And so they kind of did have the right. That was not a crazy idea that couldn't happen. However, the studio kind of balked at it at the time. They kind of got cold feet and they said, do something else right now. So they courted this guy, Adam Marcus, who was fresh out of film school, literally 23, as my age right now. He had been an editor and apprentice to Susan Cunningham during post production on Friday the 13th, part two. And he was kind of brought on by this producer really with just like one job, two jobs, allegedly, because this is also widely disputed to this day. They still get into Cunningham and Marcus still get into public disputes about this. He says that Cunningham told him, Marcus, that he needed to get rid of the effing mask, Jason's mask, and also said that all of the events of Friday the 13th, Jason Takes Manhattan be ignored, and kind of also most of the other events aside from the first film really be ignored. Marcus, however, rebukes that claim, asserting that Cunningham didn't have that level of control, which is like so shady, so shady.
Yeah.
Although he does, it is kind of interesting to note the mask really doesn't feature very prominently in the film.
This is true.
So kind of in a way, maybe he did have that much control over
That's
it.
interesting. To me, it's not the mask. It's that and again, I have to appreciate this film from that angle of joyous chaos, but other films have done it. It's the strings of hair.
Yeah.
It's like his 5 long strands of hair that it's just like, it is really hard to be taking this seriously if that's what I'm supposed to be doing at this point.
No, I totally agree. It's just silly.
Which was nice, right? That we then go to other bodies, right?
Absolutely. We kind of
It's
get to
weird,
have this out of
but
body
it's
stuff.
also
Yeah.
yes.
So it was originally pitched as kind of Jason Voorhees' brother, Elijah Voorhees, digging up the body, eating heart, becoming supernatural guy, doing killing spree. But then Hughley was brought on to flesh out Marcus's idea into a larger script because originally he had kind of written the character of Stephen Friedman to be Tommy Jarvis. However, the studio informed him that they didn't own the right to that character. In fact,
Oh my gosh.
they didn't own the rights to a lot of things within the Friday the 13th franchise, including the Friday the 13th franchise name. They didn't have the right to that. They, in fact,
so
only
wild.
had the rights to certain components from the first film. This is according to a Fangoria article. They only had the rights to Jason Voorhees, Pamela Voorhees, the camp, and the lake. So everything from that was kind of changed, reworked, and you kind of get this story here. And they kind of settled. Marcus's kind of vision was like he wanted to create the most deliberately stereotypical opening to the film as possible to subvert audiences' expectations and then kind of take them into this crazy world. Don't know if he delivered on the back half of that, but my expectations were certainly subverted with the opening scene.
Yes, so you and I have long upheld the claim that cold opening is rarely worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And that particularly when you start on like cold opening number 4, there may be that may be a sign something's really wrong. This, I think, is the one cold opening that just delighted me to my soul because at first they set it up so you are thinking it's going to be, like you said, by 1993, as well as by 9 films into the franchise, a very familiar series of things that don't make sense, right? Like, why is she looking around in the dark before she tries to turn on her light switch? Why is her hair up in a baseball cap like a weirdo? Like, why is she like taking a shower in this like clearly gross place? And then, like, I will admit, like, it startled a laugh out of me when she, because I'm already like, okay, this is getting ridiculous. He's there 1 second, he's literally not the next, then he's there again. And then when everyone popped up and she, dives in over the barrier and we realize that this is a giant sting, I did not anticipate that. And that was amusing, right? Because it told me the mood then I needed to be prepared for this film.
It definitely cued you, and this was going to do something different, and it does. I mean, it's a real shift for the franchise. It does pretty much ignore everything from it. In fact, the lead actors joke. Not I guess actually, I guess it's not a joke. He said he only watched the first movie in preparation for this because he felt like everybody on the film was so convinced they were doing something different that he didn't need to see anything else besides that.
It
Yeah,
sounds like you have a cricket in your house.
I do. I do have a cricket.
That's amazing. I feel like it's perfectly timed for our exploration of Friday the 13th.
Well,
It's your own little version of the woods.
it is my own little version of the woods, which is I'm glad it's fitting for our conversation. Sometimes when I'm trying to sleep, it's less ideal.
That's so
That's
funny.
a joke, but it's not.
You look so sad. So they didn't have a whole bunch of rights. My question is, because you said that they truly thought they were doing something different, which is my favorite part of, because everyone has said that since like movie 2,
Yep.
right?
Oh yeah.
So what is it that they thought that they were doing that was different? Just the fact that it was clearly not a Friday the 13th film, literally, or
Yeah,
what?
and
Okay.
I think also they definitely were pretty hyped kind of about the mystical element of it. And the Marcus in particular has really in the years since he has really just been like beating the horse about he's like this is the best one because it establishes the Evil Dead connection and that is why. And so I really
Okay.
honestly don't. It's really just these kind of little things. I think if you really engage with most of the rest of the movie, it becomes difficult to make that statement. And so let's attempt to engage with the rest of the movie.
Sure. And I want to ask one more question.
For
So you
sure.
said that so Marcus was 23 when he was on this film,
That's right.
but you said that he had worked on number 2.
He was an apprentice. Yes.
I guess he probably wasn't as young as I thought he was, because we got through the first like 8 films in like
In like
3 or
very
4
in like a
years.
really quick
Yeah.
succession.
Okay. Okay.
So he may I'm let me
But
give
he
me
still would have been pretty
give me
young,
two
right?
seconds. What
Yeah.
year was that? Yeah, he would have been that actually was pretty 81. He would have
Oh
been
wow.
very young. So he was like I guess like a
Like
kid, like a child.
yeah, like
He was a
10.
child. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. So that's an interesting legacy to add to this. So let's talk through. Let's talk. Starting with one of the things that you said, which is that this character is Stephen, because he definitely sort of felt like more of the final guy than Jessica did the final girl, right? He was very
For
um
sure.
canny and like was definitely figuring it out way ahead of time. He literally jumped out of his handcuffs, like he definitely was set up to be more of the main character than the sister and what niece of Jason were meant to be. So that's interesting that you say that they were trying to sort of establish him as Tommy Jarvis 2.0, because
I
that makes
I
sense.
mean, and literally they wanted him to be Tommy Jarvis from like parts
That's
four
so
through
funny.
six.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, and honestly, that would have I don't know. I liked Tommy enough, but I don't think
Yes.
it would have been enough to the save the experience or slash what they
No.
have the character then proceed to do.
Correct. But I do think it's really important to acknowledge that this franchise from the beginning, and some of this was because things were tricksy with Adrian King, right? For number 2, but this franchise has been trying from almost the start to create our dichotomy, right? To create our final girl killer dynamic in the same way that Nightmare on Elm Street has Nancy, and they have just failed continually, right? I think they came closest with Tommy, but we have to ask ourselves what it means that our final girl and the most successful final girl in the Friday the 13th franchise is a guy, but the one that had the like Carrie-esque supernatural, she could move things with her mind. Like that also just kind of didn't work, right? Like it just time and again it feels like that they just can't figure out that dynamic.
It's interesting, then I guess to kind of carry that point further, that then the filmmaker Marcus focuses in so much on Evil Dead, another franchise that kind of features a final guy, which I guess
Yes.
could kind of interesting. I don't know if the film, yeah, it is. I guess it's interesting. I don't,
Yeah. It's interesting, but again, if we go back to the phrase that I'm claiming from Clayton, of joyous chaos, I'm not sure that I can, and it sounds like you're kind of trying to get to this too, that I don't know if we can claim that any of that is intentional, right? It just
yeah,
feels like they threw some stuff to the wall, hoped some of it would stick, were pleasantly surprised, and then just kept rolling. And that's from everything to like, why is the Voorhees house still here? I mean, there was just like there were so many moments that you could just tell that they were like, keep going, we'll just get through, which then again makes me so delighted that they truly see this as just like this outstanding product within the franchise, because it's just like such a weird mix. Because there's a moment, so when the coroner is doing the autopsy before he eats the heart, they're the shots, because of the editing, in one shot he has no blood on his face. In another shot, his face is covered in blood, but he hasn't started eating the heart yet. In another shot, it's like partial, and this is sequential. And then he eats the heart. Like it's just like it's a continuity error that's not even like a gentle one. Like it is a blatant in your face. This is definitely just something that they didn't bother to really to worry about, right?
yeah.
But then there are these moments that you just that are I feel like are homages to previous films in the sequence. But for me, and this is why I enjoyed this film more than some of the others, felt like they were aware of the ridiculousness, right? Whereas some of the other films gave us these things that I think that they were trying to present as straight, but that were just so weirdly, bizarrely humorous. So a really good example is the pairing of the woman Joey, who's the diner owner, and her lover, who's Leslie Jordan, right? Like anytime that you have Leslie Jordan playing a character that's supposed to be straight, first off, but also like, a tough guy, you know that it has to be being set up for laughs, right? Like you just wouldn't cast him otherwise. And I think the film was more cognizant of the ridiculousness than some of the other Jason films have been, about
Yeah,
just the like, we're going to show you some weird characters.
I think we've definitely just, for a while we kind of talked about, we were like, oh, are these human people in the same way
Yes,
that like
yes.
something from like the Halloween always mostly tries to give you human grounded victim characters, whereas something like Nightmare is has more fun with some of like its victims, and this had always kind of teetered the line. I think we've just descended into full caricature with this. We've got like the diner scenes are quite fun. I do love the guy who's come back and he's made it his own mission to just like convince everybody that Jason is still around, rightly so. It's a fun and I do still think that we take way, way too long to get to the really good stuff, which happens
Yeah.
right in the final act. We get a whole lot of like Jason possessing people kind of back and forth, and then being reborn into like a weird, freaky, demonic infant thingy. Do that. It's like by the time we do get to that final basement in there and we're about to kill him, the movie has just really started to get going and you're having fun. No, that's it. That's kind
Yeah,
of what
and
I.
I think the film struggles in part with the fact that, and this is true of any film that decides that it's the best in the franchise and it's quote doing something really different, is it's building on a non-existent history, right? But doing so in a way that it makes us feel like we should know that history, because there's all these lines about like, why Jason's coming back for you, Diane, and you're like, why? And it takes a good like 10 or 15 minutes before you find
explain
out. And then,
anything. Yeah.
yes. And then they're like, we have to be really careful about Jessica. And you're like, who the F's Jessica?
Yeah.
And there's a hint that we should understand the backstory of Stephen and Jessica and kind of what led them there. And there's a lot of those sort of moments where the film is asking us to have a whole different history, but because they literally can't reference any of the history, nor do they apparently want to, of the previous films, it becomes non-existent, even more so. I mean, it would already be non-existent, right? But like, you can't have references to a history no one knows about.
Yeah, because
that just defeats the purpose.
they try to set up that his half sister Diana, daughter
Yes.
Jessica, Stephanie. Yeah, it's a whole
like,
lot.
the math
but
doesn't
it doesn't
work, right?
Yeah,
because
it doesn't make any sense.
If Jason was born in 47, now admittedly Diane could have been born later, but Pamela had to die by 1980 and she was kind of long in tooth by then. She does not look in 93, right? She would have had to been like 50 something. She's the same age. It looks like the actress is the same age as Jessica. So there's just like, again, these moments where you can tell that even as they're trying to give you this rich, steep history, there's just a whole bunch of stuff that they just don't care about having make logical sense. But there are some really just, I think, funny moments in here that again show that they do have a sense of humor. The little segment where we see the American crimes and they're like, this man is dead. This man's dead. Is it related? And then that like stamp of like, yes, pops up. Like, there are these moments where you are seeing that they are aware of the sheer goobiness of what they're doing, right? And also just the sort of playing into our obsession culturally with finding out about these stories, no matter how ridiculous they are. And I think that in those moments it shined, but you're right. You already don't really care about Jason because you never get to hear him and you never really get to see him. But now we literally don't even get to see him. And I think that makes it hard to be interested when it's a Jason movie that doesn't even give us Jason.
Yeah, it is very difficult. Yeah, you could to kind of care about a lot of these canon fire characters who are at this point so character-y, but the stuff it does with the Jason character is quite unique when Jason is on screen.
Yes. And the deaths are, as always, fun and ridiculous and impossible.
Yeah.
The Joey, the diner owner, gets like her face punched in or elbowed in, right? So there are these moments that you're like, okay, they know that this is ridiculous. I'm here for that.
Yeah. I guess it's just is knowing them being like, it is kind of ridiculous enough to justify the kind of like laziness of it. It was it was interesting. They kind of rejected the initial script because they called it a hodgepodge. That's a direct quote. And they brought on more writers to fix it up and clean it up. And I just, if they described the original script as a hodgepodge, and this is what got filmed, I'd love to see.
I have a lot of questions. Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine.
Yeah,
what could it even be? Because this is like almost literally the definition of a hodgepodge. That's so wild to me. I also want to talk about, there are a couple things that happen in this film that I think are worth noting because they feel like throwaway elements, but they actually complicate and in some instances even queer the text in ways that I think are worth discussing. And the first one is that scene where Jason is still in the coroner's body, but the coroner has captured the one deputy and has like stripped him naked and like tied him down with leather, and then he shaves him, right, and shaves off his mustache, which I think is played for laughs in some respects because like Jason is so particular about his bodies that he has to have them be clean shaven, I guess. But there's also this weird like homoerotic layer that has certainly been present in other slasher films, but that is weird in this one because Jason is not a torturer. He is not someone that locks someone or ties someone down, right? He's a killer of opportunity. And so I wasn't quite sure, again, other than just the for kicks and giggles, what that scene was supposed to do, because then we have this other homoerotic scene also between a black character and a white character.
Yeah.
Where
with the
when they're in the prison,
of the fingers, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was a really weird scene that really grabbed my attention. So I was tuned out through some of it. But I knew exactly where you were going with this because I was I checked back in fiercely for that scene because I was just so confused with what was going on. And this, I mean, in order this ritual that is enacted, this exchange of
Yes.
information via breaking of bones.
And it was very sexual, right? The
Yes.
camera angle had these like extreme close-ups of him stroking the other guy's hand before he'd break it. And then, like you said, it was ritualistic because he'd be like, are you sure you want this? And he's like, yes. And then he's like, are you sure? Because, that's the price of knowledge. And I'm like, according to whom? Like, where is this coming from? And even the quote
Yeah.
explanation that he had to have a broken hand to be able to escape makes no sense for the amount of time that scene lingers on the screen.
It's a really fascinating scene that doesn't it doesn't, I don't know if it necessarily makes any sense in the context of
No,
the film or needed to be there, but it's a really interesting scene and kind of like a
it is an interesting
allegory for the
scene.
price of knowledge, for sure.
Yes.
And I'll and
Slash again the
very
forbidden,
homoerotic and the
right?
forbidden.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
I'll give it. I will. So, and I guess I'll give it that it captured attention in a film that
That is true.
I did, and I might, sorry, Friday fans, I was bored through quite a bit. So when I just remembered when things caught my attention, and that one certainly did.
I think that the entire character of Creighton Duke is interesting, certainly underdeveloped, certainly not doing the things I want to see, because I think that he could have been much more interesting, particularly again because of the casting and the fact that he's showing up in this small town. But we have been taught that there is often a character, the Harbinger, right, who has the warning. But what's interesting about this film is that multiple times Duke says, I know exactly how to do this, but I'm not going to tell you because you haven't paid my price. And of course, sometimes that price is $500,000 and sometimes that price is a broken hand. But that could have been, I think, played into much more intriguingly, right? Like we really could have seen that go somewhere, I think, much more fascinating. Instead, we just get these weird moments where we're not sure what to do with Duke, because I think that the film doesn't know what to do with Duke. So one of my favorite lines I was telling you that you didn't remember, which is super okay because it was the weirdest line I
Yeah.
may have ever heard. There's a scene when Creighton Duke is being interviewed for that American Crimes TV show. And the interviewer says, so the interviewer begins by saying, like, we're going to get to have a behind the scenes look at this compound that no one's ever seen before. And then, of course, we don't actually get to see the compound. We just see this weird moment where they're drinking pink lemonade, which is just such a weird detail. And the interviewer goes, I'm going to say a couple of words to you, and I want you to say the first thing that comes to mind. Then Duke says, okay. The interviewer says, Jason Voorhees. And then Duke responds with a line that I just don't know what this means, but it just doesn't sound okay. He says, that makes me think of a little girl in a pink dress sticking a hot dog through a donut. And there's a sexual layer to that that's pretty hard to ignore.
Yeah.
But like, I don't understand. And then it just like, and then the interview just kind of cuts, right? And I feel like that's what Duke was, right? He was this like moment of chaos that was never used fully. At one point, he kidnaps a child,
He
right? He
does.
kidnaps baby Stephanie. And that again could have been really interesting because there were some overtones, undertones, just tones, to Candyman, right? And another 1990s film, right?
Tony Todd originally auditioned for this film, if you can believe it.
And didn't get it, or
Did
he didn't
not.
want it.
I don't have that information in front of me,
Okay,
but I do know he originally auditioned.
that's interesting.
Let me double check. Let me see if I can find an answer really quick. Keep going, and if I can,
Yeah,
or
so he would have been an interesting choice, but it would have been underutilized, right? Not that he's not been underutilized a lot, but it just would have been. Yeah, I can see how they would have thought to cast him. Actually, it would have been really interesting because Candyman came up before, so then it would have almost felt like another weird cross. Do you see? Did he get it? Did he not accept it, or did he not end up getting it?
it appears so. He auditioned for the role of Duke, but obviously went to Stephen Williams, and I can't see any more information about this. It does appear that it is available on page 92 of Crystal Lake Memories: The Complete History of Friday the 13th by Peter Brock. So if anybody out there has that book, you can go and
Oh
find
my gosh.
yourself the answers and read more about it.
Yes.
But until this time, the free thing I'm looking at online will only tell me where to find the information.
And that character, that bounty hunter idea, the sort of like lone wolf. Again, he's not being set up as the nemesis of Jason, because Jason actually doesn't even like know that this dude's out to get him. And so it was just another layer, right? That had so much potential. Like, it would have been great if, first off, if we'd gone to hell.
For sure.
But if like
For sure.
this bounty hunter had journeyed down to hell with him, right? Like, imagine if it had been like Jason goes to Dante's Inferno.
Yeah.
I would watch him make his way through the 7 circles of hell, just for the record.
Being chased
I would pay
by
to see that.
this like crazy like
Yes.
bounty hunter who equally has like no morals, only desire to like bring justice to this. That would have been very interesting. Alas.
Alas.
The
And because we don't have any of that, right? Like, how does Duke know all this stuff, right? Like, not even that's mentioned. But again, it's all sort of alluded to as though if we had watched this imaginary film in between, we too would know the backstory, right? Like, it feels like a film that if that was the only Friday the 13th film you watched, you would assume, oh, I bet that all these plot holes are covered
in
the prior films. Yeah. Instead,
not.
it's just, no, it's not. And then we get to the end where Jessica sort of has to save the day, but doesn't really. It's mainly Stephen. And then Stephen almost gets dragged down to hell, which again might have been interesting, but instead, at the very last moment, they suck Jason under, and then we are set up for Friday versus Jason. But I think you're right that it sets things up for that, but that's not even the next film.
No, I was about to say that is Jason X is the next in the franchise, and it's not until 2003 that we will get the Freddy versus Jason crossover, which you can listen to our episode about on stream. But
and Jason 10 he goes to space, right?
That's right. I hope, and you know what?
Okay.
I hope.
So
I hope.
I have actually seen that one, and it is set in space.
Okay, thank goodness. Because after Manhattan and Hell, I just am like kind of expecting them to not be able to deliver on the premise. So you know what? I'm gonna trust you. You say you've seen it, so I'm excited then to actually go to space.
I think I saw it when it came out. So like, I don't remember anything other than it was like I think it may have been the first Jason film I saw, because it just was, like out when I was a kid. So that's how I saw it.
For sure.
But I do want to say, I was reading something recently by Kevin Wetmore, who's one of the scholars out there that I just have such an academic crush on, because I just like everything he does. And he was talking about, he was trying, and I think succeeding a little bit, to explain how the not arriving in Manhattan until an hour in actually allows it to become a slasher film like other slasher films that grounds itself in high school in a little bit more, ways than summer camp. I was there for that argument, but you're right. Like, it's been intriguing to have had the last 2 films in the titles promise things that are actually not the most significant parts of the film, which I think is wild to me. But that's Friday the 13th for you, right?
That's Friday the 13th.
Or not Friday the 13th.
It's Jason Goes to Hell.
Doesn't get to be
the final Friday.
So is that why Jason X is also going to not be Friday the 13th, because they don't have the rights to the title?
I do believe so. I believe they don't get the right stuff officially figured out. I'm not sure if it's with the 2003 film or with the remake, but it is not until a little bit later. I think you're right. We're going to have a
Friday the 13th in 2023, so we can just reenact our own film.
Oh yes, very good.
Yeah.
When is that? Is that October?
October 13th. It's October. Oh, I know. I'm so excited. So we'll have to think about what we're doing, but it probably will not be Friday the 13th. I'm glad we're nearing the end of our journey, although eventually there will be a TV show for us to watch.
Wow, a glowing ring of endorsement for the franchise we've been working our way through.
It's just been so wildly inconsistent.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what you said, right? That every single person believes that their film is groundbreaking, doing something else that sets it apart from the franchise. and the best of its bunch. And like none of the other franchises we've looked at have had that sort of wild backstory.
Every now and then you'll have like those like one or two filmmakers like who'll take a franchise and be like, it's all wrong, everything's broken. But that usually comes in the remake, not within the like main continuity. It's interesting to see the creators arguing with each other within like the main continuity of a franchise for kind of like authority over Jason. But the funny thing is, none of the creators will ever have authority over Jason
No?
because he's been so appropriated by the fan community, which is a blessing and a curse. It means he'll live on forever, but it also means that nobody will ever be happy with anything they make.
I think it's odd that, but also accurate, that like even in a Friday the 13th film that we like, we're like, it was a hot mess, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. So I realize that this episode sounds an awful lot like we're saying this is the worst film we've ever seen, but it's not. And it's not even necessarily the worst Friday the 13th film we've ever seen. It's just, again, to quote Clayton, joyous chaos. And if you can accept that that's what it's going to be, I think you'll be okay. And I think that might explain why my partner thought this was one of the worst films that she's ever seen in her entire life, because she actually likes the Friday the 13th films. Not all of them, right? But 1, 6, 7, even a little bit of Jason Takes Manhattan. So like, I think that if you are a franchise lover, or that this film is going to be maybe not your cup of tea. But for me, as someone that is just trying to find the joy, there were moments, right? But I am also glad that we only do our Jason Friday the 13th episodes every other, because it means that we can have a palate cleanser, and we're actually doing something we've never done before, which is terribly exciting. What are we doing, Tony?
So we are going to be venturing into our first nonfiction book, which you may be asking, what? How nonfiction? Horror? Well, we're going to be diving into Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma by Claire Deidre. How did you wait?
No, there's a lot of E's and R's.
I know.
Deidre. I don't. Dederer is how you spell the last name. Claire, if you could tell us how to say it, that would be super cool. And maybe we'll Google that before we do a whole episode.
Definitely before the full episode, I'm going to give a gander back to the Vox podcast that I first heard her on, talking about her work. They invited her on there, and she gave such a fantastic interview on there. She was such a great subject. Yeah. But I was like, I absolutely want to check out her full book. I ate it up this summer, and I said to you, Katie, we have to talk about this. I know it's a bit different than what we've done before, but I think it gets into kind of real world monsters, fan culture in a way that we will have a lot to talk about on the podcast in relation to nightmares and horror and conversations about society.
And so much of our conversation has been about sitting at that uncomfortable line as an academic and a fan, right? And consuming this thing that is meant to traumatize us and also meant to show us, the darker underbelly. So I think that I'm really looking forward to discussing this book.
Well, prepare to be further traumatized as an academic and writer, because she certainly has some monstrous things to say about us. So definitely strap in. Good to know.
Yay, I'm so excited. So hopefully you all will take a gander at that book, read it ahead of time. If not, you'll dive into our episode and sort of get to hear that. So please be sure to read that for next time, and then know that we'll be returning back to Friday the 13th thereafter. I want to give a shout out, as I always try to do, to Jackson O'Brien, because Jackson takes out all those points where we're like, oh yeah, maybe we should look that up before we keep speaking, and makes it look like we actually just always know the words that we want to say. So thank you so much, Jackson.
It's true.
And to those of you listening, yes. And to those of you listening, thank you so much for listening to our nightmares.
And have a spooktacular day.